Thanks very much, Geraldine, again for that warm welcome. I don't have a watch, so you can all jump up and leave, I suppose. Isn't that what you do? You just walk out, and I'll know I'm finished. I'm going to start with a small reading from this book, The Forgotten Waltz, called, the first chapter is called There Will Be Peace in the Valley. Each chapter, as you know, is named after a popular song. This song was by Christy Moore, so it wasn't that popular. Anyway, I met him in my sister's garden in Enniskerry. That is where I saw him first. There was nothing fated about it, though I add in the late summer light and the view. I put him at the bottom of my sister's garden in the afternoon, at the moment the day begins to turn. 5:30, maybe. It is 5:30 on a Wicklow summer Sunday when I see Sean for the first time. There he is, where the end of my sister's garden becomes uncertain. He's about to turn around, but he doesn't know this yet. He's looking at the view, and I am looking at him. The sun is low and lovely. He's standing where the hillside begins its slow run down to the coast, and the light is at his back. And it is just that time of day when all the colours come into their own. It's some years ago now. The house is new, and this is my sister's housewarming party, or first party, a few months after they moved in. The first thing they did was take down the wooden fence to get their glimpse of the sea. So the back of the house sits like a missing tooth in the row of new homes, exposed to easterly winds and to curious cows. A little stage set for this afternoon of happiness. They have new neighbours in and old pals and me and a few cases of wine. And the barbecue they put on their wedding list but ended up buying themselves. It sits on the patio, a green thing with a swivelling bucket of a lid. And my brother-in-law, Shay, I think he even wore the apron, waves wooden tongs over lamb steaks and chicken drumsticks while cracking cans of beer high in the air with his free hand. Fiona keeps expecting me to help because I am her sister. She passes with armfuls of plates and shoots me a dark look. Then she remembers that I'm a guest and offers me some Chardonnay. Yes, I say, yes, I'd love some, thanks. And we chat like grown-ups. The glass she fills me is the size of a swimming pool. It makes me want to cry to think of it. It must have been 2002. There I was, just back from 3 weeks in Australia, and mad, just mad into Chardonnay. My niece Megan must have been 4, my nephew nearly 2, fantastic, messy little items who look at me like they're waiting for the joke. They have friends in too. It's hard to tell how many kids there are running around the place. I think they're being cloned in the downstairs bathroom. A woman goes in there with one toddler. She always comes out fussing over 2. I sit beside the glass wall between the kitchen and garden. It really is a lovely house. And I watch my sister's life. The mothers hover around the table where the kids' food is set, while out in the open air, the men sip their drinks and glance skywards as though for rain. I end up talking to a woman who's sitting beside a plate of chocolate Rice Krispie cakes and working her way through them in a forgetful sort of way. They have mini marshmallows on the top. She goes to pop one in her mouth and pulls back in surprise. "Oh, pink," she says. I don't know what I was waiting for. My boyfriend, Connor, must have been dropping someone off or picking them up. I can't remember why he wasn't back. He would have been driving. He usually drove so I could have a few drinks, which is one of the good things about Connor, I have to say. These days, it's me who drives. But that's an improvement, too. And I don't know why I remember the chocolate Rice Krispies, except that, oh, pink, seemed like the funniest thing I'd ever heard, and we ended up weak with laughter, myself and this nameless neighbour of my sister's. She, in particular, so crippled by mirth, you couldn't tell if it was appendicitis or hilarity, had her so bent over, in the middle of which she seemed to keel off her chair a little. She rolled to the side while I just kept looking at her and laughing. Then she hit the ground running and began a low charge out through the glass door and towards my brother-in-law. The jet lag hit. I remember the strangeness of this woman lumbering straight at Shay while he cooked on, the hissing meat, the flames, me thinking, is it night time? What time is it anyway? While the chocolate Rice Krispie cake died on my lips. The woman stooped as though to tackle Shay by the shins, but when she rose, it was with a small, suddenly buoyant child in her arms, and she was saying, out of there, all right, out of there. The child looked around him, indifferent, more or less, to this abrupt change of scene. 3, maybe 4 years old. She set him down in the grass and went to hit him. At least I thought so. She raised a hand to him and then suddenly back at herself, as though to clear a wasp from in front of her face. How many times do I have to tell you? Shay lifted an arm to crack a beer and the child ran off and the woman just stood there, running her wayward hand through her hair. Okay, there's a bit more, sorry. That was one thing. There were others. There was Fiona, her cheeks a hectic pink, her eyes suddenly wet from the sheer la 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 of pouring wine and laughing gaily and being a beautiful mother / hostess in her beautiful new house. And there was Connor, my love, who was late. It's 2002 and already none of these people smoke. I sit on my own at the kitchen table and look for someone to talk to. The men in the garden seemed no more interesting than they did when I arrived in their short-sleeved shirts and something about their casual trousers that still screams slacks. I'm just back from Australia. I remember the guys you see along Sydney Harbour front at lunchtime, an endless line of them, running men, tanned and fit, men you could turn around and follow without knowing that you were following them, the same way you might pick up a goddamn Rice Krispie cake and not know that you were eating it until you spotted the marshmallow on the top. Oh, pink. I really want a cigarette now. Fiona's children have never seen one, she told me. Megan burst into tears when an electrician lit up in the house. I pull my bag from the back of the chair and idle my way across the threshold, past Shay, who waves a piece of meat at me, through rain-bleached tricycles and cheerful suburbanites, down to where Fiona's little rowan tree stands, tethered to its square stake, and the garden turns to mountainside. There's a little log house down here for the kids made out of brown plastic. A bit disgusting, actually. The logs look so fake they might as well be moulded out of chocolate or rubberized shit. I lurk behind this yoke and I'm so busy making this seem a respectable thing to do, leaning into the fence, smoothing my skirt, furtively rooting in my bag for smokes, that I do not see him until I light up. So my first sight of Sean, in this, the story I tell myself about Sean, takes place at the beginning of my first exhalation. His body, the figure he makes against the view, made hazy by the smoke of a long, delayed Marlborough light. Sean. He is, for a moment, completely himself. He's about to turn around, but he doesn't know this yet. He will look around and see me as I see him, and after this, nothing will happen for many years. There's no reason why it should. It really feels like nighttime. The light is wonderful and wrong. It's like I have to pull the whole planet around in my head to get to this garden and this part of the afternoon and to this man who is the stranger I sleep beside now. Okay. I haven't read that in a long time. So you get €5 if you recognise the Ivan Boland reference in the garden. There's another €5.
What, the toys around?
Yeah, the toys, the tricycles, the bleach,
toys,
yeah. She gets €5.
Or at least a coffee, anyway.
At least.
I don't think this microphone is working somehow.
Do you want to?
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Anne. I'm not going to say very much because they've done all the work for me, which is great. So we've given you a list of what the students wanted to ask you in advance. So I don't know, do you want to work through them?
I can read them out as we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just, Chloe Byrne? Are you there? Chloe? Okay.
Hey, Chloe. Will I? Yeah.
Yeah.
Will I read it out? Or do you, yeah.
It's
As an aspiring writer, this is Chloe. No, not embarrassing at all. Nothing about this is embarrassing at all. I'm always conscious of the development of my style. Many aspects of your style appeal to me. I would like to know if you're deliberate in your wording or whether you let your words flow naturally. In other words, do you focus on the accessibility of your work, the appeal, or the genre? Do you write to fit a genre, or does the genre fit your writing? Does everyone know what genre fiction is? Yeah, look it up. Okay.
That's my job, not yours.
Okay, so this is more or less literary fiction or popular literary fiction, as Claire Kilroy says it, a literary page turner. So a piece of literary fiction that owes something to romantic fiction or plays with the ideas of romantic fiction. So Chloe, you're interested in style and how you get, I mean, some people call it voice, and how do you get to a particular voice? This is a very close third person, or it's a first person narration. This is Gina. And this is her voice, so she dictates the style to an extent. One of the things that that some people find difficult or some people find nice about the way I write is that I tend to shift tone from paragraph to paragraph, from sentence to sentence, and even sometimes on either side of a comma, from the first clause to the second clause, you'll get a kind of ironic shift or lift, or you'll realise that something was a bit of a joke, but you're not quite sure what the joke was. And Gina is full of that. We know what the joke, that it's not quite complicity with the reader, but she's full of jokes, which isn't quite a sense of lightness. It's almost like a sense of hurt expressed as lightness, which is one thing, you know, irony being a kind of distance you have from yourself or from the situation, and that remove, that disconnect is not always a joyful one, but it's quite a powerful one. So, am I deliberate in my wording, or do I let my words flow naturally? This is a question to an extent not just about style or voice, but also about process. What happens when you write, and what happens when you make things up? And unfortunately, that the state of flow that is the creative sort of act is not self-conscious. It's not accessible to when you're writing and it's going well, you've no idea how you did it. And it's very hard to explain afterwards. You're sort of in the moment and you're working and it's working, and that's fantastic. That's one of the reasons people really want to write. So yes, I let the words flow naturally, but as you should know, everything in writing is about rewriting. So the first natural flow, you then stand back from it in an editorial or an ironic, or you work it sentence by sentence, line by line, paragraph by paragraph. You work your cadences, you cut, you throw things out. I started saying, you know, that I rewrite everything except the bits that are left in the book, that I rewrite things 50 times and then throw them out. And a lot of what's left in the book was actually nearly a first draft, but that's after 30 years of sorrow and labour. Do I focus on the accessibility of my work, or the appeal, or the genre? Do you write to fit a genre, or does the genre fit your writing? There's a bit of a conversation going when you're making a book with all the other books that have been made. Something is 70,000 words long. So you're thinking about other things that were 70,000 words long, more or less, literally, factually, physically, in the world, a book. It makes you think about other books. How do you do that thing, a book? So there is a conversation about genre in this book. But also a conversation about what informs the genre, what it is from Jane Austen onwards that makes for a happy, or from Tolstoy onwards, or even before Tolstoy, that makes for the adultery novel, or a love story or a book about marriage or a book about romance. I was really interested in the difference between romance and love, and the difference between being in love and loving someone, which is there's a connection. But it's not the same thing. Does that answer your questions? Do I focus on the accessibility of my work? I want to be talking directly to the reader, I do, yeah. In some ways, I was going to say I don't write to be admired, but I think all writers are just boasters one way or the other and do nothing else but write to be admired. But one thing you could identify is a difference between high and low culture, a difference between, and so where the writer, when you're reading a book, where do you feel the writer is in relation to you, the reader? Do you feel they're up here in a cloud, delivering wisdom? And look, is that the angle? What is the angle through the text to the writer? And what I want the angle to be is that I want to be sitting right there with the reader, that there's no hierarchy of attention, put it that way. And also that the writer doesn't know, in a very omniscient and high-minded and sometimes noble sense, a huge amount more than the reader. We're all just blundering around in the same space, as far as I'm concerned. So that's to answer the question about accessibility. Okay, Joyce Dignam. Great Joycean name. Hi, Joyce. Will I read out your question? Often female characters in literature can be underdeveloped, stereotyped, or just a pursuit for the male character. I thought that the portrayal of Gina in The Forgotten Waltz was honest, unapologetic, and had many different layers. Do you think that there's a pressure to write women in a certain way? If so, how do you combat this? I was reminded when I read this question of the Bechdel rule. Does everyone know the Bechdel rule? From Alison Bechdel, who's she's a graphic novelist and anyway, she wrote Fun Home and anyway, the Bechdel rule is when she's gay, she went to the cinema, and if she was looking for two women having a conversation about something that wasn't the male lead. Okay, so you go every Hollywood picture, you say, are there two women in this piece of work who have a conversation about something that isn't the male lead? And it's really incredibly hard to find characters who break the Bechdel rule before like 5 years ago. So I'm 50 years old, I'm on a plane, I'm looking at Bridesmaids, and I'm thinking I had to wait this long for a really stupid movie with women in it. That's how long I had to wait, because there were endless decades of stupid movies with guys in it, and you just think, well, that's just a stupid movie. But no, what you're saying is it's nothing to do with me one way or the other. And that women should be, as usefully or uselessly stupid as men within a narrative, and have the same freedoms to be, to refer to a further question, flawed. I mean, the definition of a character is perhaps someone who does something wrong. You should be looking at the page saying, no, don't do that. With many of the characters that you'll come across in fiction, they're often mistaken, they're often wrong-headed in some way. You have to, in some level, believe in their, I was going to say goodness, but I don't know if you have to believe in Gina's goodness. You can think about that. Is she good? Okay, so another problem about the characterization of women historically is that they owe so much to stereotypes, but also to archetypes and to mythic ideas of women as being, virgins or whores and blah, 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 blah. This is old hat now. I don't have to explain this from all over again, or do I? Okay, so my aim in life was to have female characters that were just like characters, and that gender, although it is at play within these kind of romantic situations, it doesn't dictate how they are either to themselves or in the world. And we don't know much about how Gina is in the world. It's possible, actually, that she's a real high-heeled chick. It's possible that she lashes on the fake tan on a regular basis. We don't, I don't put a mirror in my books, so you rarely know how the character presents themselves. You wouldn't necessarily be able to describe Gina in the pub on a Saturday, except you'd know that she looked really great. I think you'd know that, wouldn't you? So she doesn't name the handbag, but you know she's got the handbag. You know the handbag is important to her somehow. But I'm not writing social satire, so I'm not making the handbag Prada. There are very few labels. Chardonnay is rare in that. So there are very few. It's not a social satire. It's not about commerce. There's a lot about money in it, but it's not necessarily just about commerce. It's not enthralled to what Gina is maybe enthralled to on that level. Okay. Oh yeah, so you see in a movie or on the stage, the thing I never saw was a girl like the girl I knew at school. So you're looking at the women as they're represented in various fictions, and they make sense to you, but only on a mythic level. They're not like Sharon from 5th class, okay? They're like something. So that added hum that goes to the characterization of women, that is that world of projections, and that is what we make women to be in our fictions, or what historically they have made to be in your fictions. I mean, there are now a series of movies where it is pretty much like the chicks you went to school with, where they're just people. They're not humming in some way. Sexy, reassuring, dangerous. It's not about your response to their femaleness. They're just agents within the world. They're just going about their business. Okay, James Fanning. Hey, James. In an interview with The Believer magazine, well researched, in January 2014, you stated, that interview was called Conan, and I was quite interested in whether it came from Conan the Barbarian, and I was going to ask her, and she didn't want to be asked. I went, Conan, and she, my parents just liked it. Okay. In the interview at The Believer magazine in January 2014, you stated that a story is something that's looking for insight, I think, whereas you plot a book to have an effect. What other qualities, such as insight, do you think a writer should have that are maybe sometimes overlooked or not given enough credit? Just the model that I was using in that interview, we were talking about the difference between plot and story. And say in a thriller, a plot, a novel is full of cause and effect, right? She sees him on page 9. She shags him on page 59. She leaves him or he leaves her on page 79. Cause and effect. I mean, or is that, why does she shag him? Why does she leave him? What are actually the causes? So in a novel, you're both using, by putting things side by side, you're implying that one causes the other. But you're also asking whether, just what causes it? Why did she do that? What was the true origin of those actions? So the novel is always interrogating ideas of cause and effect and of consequence. So the novel is kind of a game of consequences. If you do this, then that happens. But the novel also undoes that sense of consequence. If you do this, why does that happen as opposed to anything else? Okay, so I have this idea of a plot as a big machine. So you put in little ping pong balls, like a lottery machine. You put in a ping pong ball, character A, go all down in a steampunk sort of round, and pops out and intersects here and meets there, and there's a coincidence, there's a consequence. That makes that lever go, that makes that roll, and then boom, end of the book. That works very strongly in something like a thriller where the revelation is who, say there's a murder, as there always is, say it's a dead woman, it usually is, who killed the girl, who strangled her with her own tights, okay? Oh, okay. which guy strangled her with her own tights? And so you say, is it that guy or the other guy or the third guy? And first of all, you think it's the first guy, and then you think it's the other guy, and then you're sure it's the third guy, but actually it's the second guy after all. Twist, right? So you get that thing, twist, and you've also got revelation. Da-da, there's the revelation. And the detective, as he is putting together the clues that lead us through A, B, C, and back to B again, is, you know, putting a puzzle together or a machine together, the machine of the plot. Who was where, when, and what did they do? In a story, the revelation isn't like, da-da, he did it. It's more like, oh yeah, okay. It's just like something's kind of sort of bothering you and you don't know what it is, and then, yeah, maybe it was that. So a story is a bit more like life. I mean, there could be, insights can come like in the, she never liked me. There's an insight, okay? They can come big and strong, but they can also become very, very subtle and liminal. And it's like, the sky is that color blue again, as if that holds some sort of insight, a taste of a plum or something. So that sense of click is one of the things that I'd be looking for in a story. Gina doesn't really have a lot of insights. She's not a very insightful character. She's not hugely self-aware. Okay, Samantha Hayward, Wood. Hi, Samantha. Samantha has 3 questions. I'm only going to answer 2 of them. And I might say why I can't answer the middle one. What inspires you to write? Do you require a specific sort of backdrop or ambience while you're writing, or you just set a time? Okay, this is another question about process, to which there are like 700 answers and no answer really. Writers are very anxious about their ambience, right? Evelyn Waugh couldn't write if he heard his children in the same wing of the house. Okay? So what was it about his children's voices that undid his creative moment and just left it all in tatters on the floor? He could not write if the children were within 50 feet of him. Other writers cannot write unless they have a pen, a space. Alice Munro, one of the great writers, used to, at one stage, was laying out her manuscript on the ironing board. That's where she was doing her writing. And her infant daughter was cross that she was busy doing her writing and not looking after her infant daughter. And I just wondered whether she would be less cross if she was doing the ironing. It's dangerous sport, ironing. Much more dangerous than writing. Anyway, so where do you write? How do you write? How do you manage to form a properly bounded sense of solitude in which you feel safe enough to create? And the answer is I don't, and I write anywhere, because I know that that's what I need, is a safely bounded space. So I can write in the airport, only to show off though. Only if you're traveling with a group of writers and you say, hang on. Okay. What are some habits or tropes you find to be particularly damning, or I suppose damnable, in popular literature today? How would you just suggest doing away with them or addressing them? I really can't, that's too big a question, Samantha. Have you anything in mind? No. What really annoys or bores you in it's interesting, I have a story coming out. I'm doing a Q&A for a magazine called The New Yorker about, and I've written a story It's coming out next week, and it's quite a political short story. And I've never written politically before, but and they're saying, why are you writing politically now? And the answer, of course, is Donald Trump. And the short story is small enough and sharp enough to respond quickly. But the books that are going to come out of the rise of the right wing in Europe and America are only now being gestated and won't be read for another 5, 10 or 20 years. So the short story is a very mobile little item that you can actually, you can shift and change within that genre quicker than you can within the novel. But now there is a trend for fiction to become very like non-fiction, very like memoir, and to rinse all sense of story or narrative or, you know, stupid stuff, fairy tale, folk tale, myth, out of the story. And with it, it has also become a very apolitical object, just in the last 5 or 10 years. So the story that people reached for this year was A Handmaid's Tale, which was written in 1985 by Margaret Atwood. And it was gestated in the 1970s, in the feminism of the 1970s, and that's what we needed at that moment, was A Handmaid's Tale. We needed a big, stupid fairy tale, science fiction fairy tale, because anyway, so the moment calls out different narrative responses. Okay, does anyone understand that? I'm not sure I do myself. I have to finish that Q&A. Yeah, okay. With The Forgotten Walls, what inspired you to research and apply epilepsy within your story, and has there been any particular meaning behind it besides bringing awareness to the condition itself? That's a really excellent question, Samantha, because it's very rarely asked. I did a lot of research into Evie's condition and was very interested in writing Evie. Children are very rarely used in fiction. They often have an uncanny effect, like a cat. You don't know what a child sees when a child looks at you. And so in 19th century fiction, they're used a lot in ghost stories and in you know, Henry James. And it's like doing your leaving cert again. Okay, I can't remember, right? Turn of the Screw. I can't remember the 19th century. It's like, so they have this on, but I'm interested in children as characters and personalities. I'm also hugely interested in the fact they change from the age of 3 to the age of 10, and it's like, wow, they're the same person. They are the same. There is some fantastic essence of them there, but they are completely different things, you know. So Evie in the story changes from 4 through to 14, I think she is at the end. She's sort of there. She's in an adult sense. She's fully morally sensitive by the end of the book. And she goes through this journey. I wanted to describe, and it's a kind of off story, I wanted to describe something that I had noticed, which is if children have more serious problems than Evie, the marriage often splits up. Not always, but that is one of the reasons that marriages can split up, or difficulties within the marriage. In some cases because the husband that wasn't what he signed up for. And that the wife has no option but to stay with the child in difficulty. So that's one dynamic that I was intrigued by when I saw in my own sort of life when I was listening to stories, as it were, at the bus stop. That's one story you hear. The other thing that I noticed when I had kids myself is because you become astonishingly anxious about them. They're amazing. They weren't alive a year ago, and then here they are on the planet. And their being alive seems for really quite a long time a fragile and tenuous thing. They arrived, and they therefore might just as easily go. So there's that magical thing, literally magical thing, idea of keeping children alive, and that there might be something wrong with them. The other thing you are convinced by in early parenthood is that you're wrecking your children, that they arrive perfect and you're just messing them up. So all of these anxieties, I needed something that would make a mother especially extraordinarily anxious, but that would not, and that was somehow, there were many different, epilepsy is just a symptom of many different illnesses or difficulties. So it's literally like a headache. A headache could be a brain tumor, or it could be, dehydration. Epilepsy is similarly a symptom. And it's hard to diagnose what the cause is, and sometimes they grow out of it. So epilepsy was, in narrative terms, the right thing for me to choose. Is that enough?
Move on to the next.
Okay.
Is that enough? I'm going to leave you back for the time.
Time, okay. Laura Kenny. Laura Kenny? I haven't seen that spelling of Laura before. It's great. L-A-Father-R-A. Kenny, why did you pick this time of Ireland to set the novel? Because of the boom. So I should really talk more about the novel. The boom. The boom and the bust, and some of you are too young to remember it, but you may remember there were 3 years of snow. And during those 3 years of snow, Ireland went down the tubes. The economy just absolutely tanked, and the snow was gorgeous. So I was looking out at the snow one day, and I realised that Gina was looking out at the snow, and I had my story. The country was totally fucked. And on a micro as well as a macro level, it wasn't just fucked in the news. It was your neighbour. It was people in difficulty everywhere. In the local train station in Bray, where I was, the footfall between 2007 and 2008 went from 12,500 per day to 2,500. You didn't know where everybody went. They went home, they went online, they went to Australia. They just had no jobs. It was an amazing moment. And it had been also amazing to live through the boom where, among other things, literature and story makers were somehow pushed to the side. And the idea that as an Irish writer you would somehow not explain the country to itself, but that you would be involved in a tradition that somehow brought us further on. That was pushed to the side. It was like, never mind all that. We have the handbags. You can fuck off now, right? So it was a very hectic, it was also very difficult to write fictions in a country that was a fiction. It was very interesting to see an economy as fiction. The house prices were going up like crazy, and the idea was, if you said that's crazy, then it would be your fault if they crashed. It was a confidence trick. So it was a trick of denial. It was a trick of fiction. It felt like money, it was debt, okay? So that was all astonishing. That was all completely astonishing. And that happened when you were 7, right? 8 and 9. And I can't remember what year it was, but on February the 6th, I looked out at the snow and said, okay, an affair. I had been looking at boom literature in the States, particularly after World War II. I was looking at Richard Yates, I was looking at John Updike. I wasn't particularly looking at the Hampstead novels of the 60s, but when money comes into a country, divorce also comes into the country. It's like Ireland had no sex until we had a few shillings, right? And then we got a bit more money and people started divorcing as well, my goodness. So that connection between sex, money, denial, fiction, how better to do it than an affair? Because an affair must be enormously great fun in a high state of denial. This isn't happening, let's keep going, yeah? We're not doing this, let's do it. And that felt very like the housing market in 2005. That's why I picked that time. Okay, Anthony, do you think Gina would be met with more or less appreciation if she was a male character? Appreciation. Gay male character? I'm just thinking through the options. Would Sean like her better? I mean, who's going to appreciate her? Okay, if she was male, I mean, Gina is what might be called a contingent character. She is made to a certain extent by the circumstances around her. If she was male, she just wouldn't be Gina. I don't know. There was another thing that I used to like sort of knowing about from a distance, and that was women who only slept with married men. And to an extent, some of them needed them to stay married, and Gina needs them him to stay married for quite a long time. And it is, in Gina's case, something to do with her rivalry with her sister. I mean, you could psychoanalyze Gina and say, okay, that's all about Fiona and the sister and rivalry, getting her out of the way or whatever. So it's important that the wife be there for Gina in order for Gina to win all the time, repeatedly, with the wife with her her middle-aged paralysed lipstick. The book was reviewed by a middle-aged woman, which is just what is a middle-aged woman, which is an interesting description for a person. But it was reviewed in a newspaper by a woman who might be called middle-aged, as indeed I might be myself. And she didn't get it. She thought that, I was being really mean to the wife, but Gina's been really mean to the wife. It's not one way or the other. Anyway, Cuilan ní bhorchu ní bhéal chalón. How did you, where are you, Cuilan? After all of that, okay. How did you begin your career as a writer? I wrote bad poetry in school. But that's not a career. I'll have to tell you that another time. Con O'Riordan, are you around, Con? Hi, Con. Do you share any characteristics with Gina or any other of your characters? Yes, I do. They're all me. People say, did you put so-and-so in your book? And I say, no, I put me. Well, they can't be anyone else, because I can't be anyone else. I mean, it's not written by anyone else. So, when I was writing short stories, because there were so many different styles of female characters in the short stories, I thought of them as abandoned lives, or lives I didn't lead, or choices I hadn't made, or, the road not taken, basically. They're all forks in the road. So all these characters are shed skins, like a snake sheds its skin. So not me. But actually, Gina is kind of more distant from me than a number of the other female characters I've written. I often write women characters with a kind of energy that somehow is liberating, but Gina is already liberated in a way. She needs to be sort of unliberated a bit. She needs to be more confined, not less. You said in an interview with Sean O'Hagan and The Guardian, The Observer actually, but on the Guardian website, that I'm drawn to flawed female characters. Why is this? Well, that's the flaw, as I'm sure you know from your Leaving Cert, it's all about the flaw. It's all about the flaw for Macbeth, it's all about the flaw for King Lear, it's all about the flaw for Romeo. And does Juliet have a flaw? So does Goneril and Regan have flaws? They have nothing but. Does Cordelia have a flaw? Of course not. The women are mono in King Lear. They only have one aspect to them in moral terms, whereas King Lear is flawed. So flaw is where it's at. Flaw means human, flaw means complex, contradictory, someone that you can sympathize with, who annoys you at the same time. Any questions from the floor? I should talk more about Gina, shouldn't I? Or is that enough?
Well, I was going to ask you one last question. Because you talked about the difference between falling in love and love. And last week we were talking about a novel that's supposed to be about which man you sleep with.
Okay.
But an awful lot of it, in the end, if there is that moment where she gets it, that you talked about, the insight, is about her mother and this child who isn't her daughter. That somehow that's...
Which novel is that?
That's this one.
Oh, this one, yeah. Sounds a lot like...
Okay, that's a bit disconcerting. That's a bit disconcerting.
Did I write that?
Yeah, you did.
I did.
And do you think that's...
Like
Is that the comparison between those two sets of relationships? Is that she falls in love with the men, But the really hard stuff, the really hard love, is somewhere in that space between the mother and Evie.
Yeah, I'm always interested in the difference between romantic or sexual love and genetic love. You have your brothers and sisters, you have your mother and father, you have your children, and you love them whether you like them or not. Even if they annoy the shit out of you, right? You still love them. And you can't choose not to love them. And this always seems to be quite unfair. Of course you love your parents, you've no option. Unless you're English and then you say, I hate my parents, and that you know, and that means something. Whereas in Ireland you say that just because it's Tuesday, right? And on you go, you still love them. So with romantic love, bang, it's completely different. You love somebody because you have in some way, or you think you have chosen them. But you know, the Greeks had many more words for love than we have. You know, there's agape and caritas and various words for these very positive, empathetic feelings towards other people. The love that Gina has, I'm in love, right? Is like teenage love, in that it's hugely egotistical. In a way, it's like, I'm in love, and therefore he must love me. Remember that thing where if you fancied someone, they didn't fancy you back? That didn't make sense. Do you remember that? It's like, why? How could that be? But I love him, right? So I'm quite interested in, it's not love as tantrum, Gina, but it is love as strong personal feeling, independent of what the world thinks. Okay, independent of the actions of the other, one way or the other. Now, the other thing I was just on that, they're at it like knives, right? They have sex every Friday. There is no anatomical description in the book. And I did that deliberately because quite a liberal critic criticised my previous book as having too many anatomical descriptions in it. And I wondered why she thought that was wrong. Like, how can you write about sex like it just happens, right? And why should a woman be invested in that? I thought, well, actually, that's the way girls talk about sex. It's like, oh, I saw him at the bus stop, right? So I'm losing my train of thought here. But love is a hugely complex question. If you also look in, there's a theological problem in the second letter of St. James, which led to much difficulty in the centuries afterwards. Whether you are saved by faith or by deeds. Whether God will take you into heaven if you just say, I love you, God. I really love you. Or you will go to heaven because you're nice to the beggar in the street. And Protestantism and all kinds of difficulties came out of that argument. Is it enough to feel hugely, or should you also act? And that is the root problem in this book. Perhaps it is enough to love, actually. Why not? Our actions are limited. But perhaps we should also act.